A stone giant rises over a small medieval town, a project that would take over 100 years to complete. How did communities with limited resources finance and build monuments like Notre Dame? Today, you will discover the secret economics of cathedral construction, revealing a financial and logistical system as complex as any modern corporation. We will uncover how letters of indulgence funded towering spires and why stonemasons guarded their knowledge with secret codes. This journey into the past will change how you see every stone and stained glass window, transforming silent monuments into a vibrant story of human ambition. What does it truly take for a society to reach for the impossible? A small town council gazes at a simple wooden church, dreaming of a stone giant to replace it. This was not a simple upgrade. It was a declaration. A cathedral promised far more than a roof for services. It was a spiritual investment on a colossal scale, believed to channel divine favor directly onto the community. The sheer audacity of the plan was its own form of currency, a way for a modest town to etch its name into the landscape of history. This was about civic pride, yes, but also about a very tangible form of future-proofing. A successful cathedral would become a magnet, drawing thousands of pilgrims, merchants, and travelers. Their need for food, lodging, and souvenirs would transform the local economy, creating a self-sustaining cycle of wealth that could last for centuries. The decision to build was therefore a masterclass in long-term strategy, intertwining deep faith with sharp economic calculation. Local leaders and church officials understood they were not just commissioning a building. They were launching a permanent economic engine, one they believed would secure their town's prosperity in this world and its citizens' salvation in the next. This grand, multi-generational ambition would demand a financial system equally ambitious and complex, setting the stage for an economic revolution cloaked in stone and stained glass. But these ledgers told a sobering story. The steady income from lands and tithes was like a reliable salary, enough to cover the weekly groceries but nowhere near enough to buy the entire mansion outright. This was the fundamental financial challenge of every cathedral building committee. Their regular income paid for the constant, humming activity of the site, the daily wages for hundreds of workers, the carts of stone and sand arriving each week. It was the financial equivalent of keeping the heart beating. Yet for the monumental leaps forward, for the shipment of 1,000 oak beams for the roof or a mountain of premium limestone for the soaring towers, they needed a different kind of money entirely. They needed windfalls, massive injections of capital that could only come from extraordinary means. This pressure to fund the impossible transformed the cathedral's leaders into some of the most innovative fundraisers of their age, pioneering methods that would feel surprisingly familiar to us today. The financial heartbeat of the cathedral was sustained by these two powerful forces, the many and the few. Imagine the roads leading into the city, not as quiet country paths, but as vibrant, moving rivers of people. These were the pilgrims traveling from every corner of the land, drawn by the magnetic pull of a sacred relic. Perhaps it was a fragment of the true cross or the bone of a beloved saint, enshrined within the cathedral's walls. Each pilgrim arrived with faith in their heart and coins in their purse. Their journey was a spiritual act, but its economic impact was profoundly real. They needed food and lodging, creating a thriving hospitality industry. They purchased leaden or tin badges, stamped with the symbol of the saint, to pin to their hats as proof of their pilgrimage. They made offerings at the altars, their small donations pooling into a vast and steady stream of income that directly funded the construction. This was the economy of salvation in action, where every step taken in faith also helped to lay another stone. Alongside this steady flow from the masses came monumental injections of capital from the elite. A wealthy merchant, anxious about the fate of his soul, might fund an entire stained glass window. A noble family, seeking to cement their legacy and ensure perpetual prayers for their ancestors, would pay for a side chapel to be built, securing their own burial place within the hallowed ground. These were not simple gifts. They were transactions for spiritual security, a way to purchase a piece of eternity. The cathedral's building committee expertly navigated this world, offering patrons not just a place in the community, but a direct line to the divine. This created a self-reinforcing cycle of astonishing power. The more magnificent the cathedral became, the more pilgrims it attracted. The more pilgrims who came, the more revenue flowed in. The more revenue available, the more the building could be expanded and adorned, which in turn drew even more patrons and pilgrims. The spiritual and the commercial became inseparable, each fueling the other in a grand, centuries-long project that was as much about economics as it was about reaching for heaven. Yet one of the most powerful fundraising tools was not a physical object at all, but a promise. Picture a traveling preacher standing in the bustling market, his voice rising above the crowd. He does not speak only of fire and brimstone. Instead, he offers a tangible solution to a universal fear, a financial transaction for the soul known as an indulgence. For a donation to the Cathedral Building Fund, a person could receive a letter. This was not a simple receipt. It was a formal document, often sealed with wax, that granted the purchaser a reduction in the time their soul, or the soul of a loved one, would spend in purgatory. This was the indulgence economy in action, a system where the church could essentially pre-sell spiritual benefits. The theological reasoning was complex, rooted in the concept of a treasury of merit accumulated by Christ and the saints, which the church could dispense. But for the average person, the appeal was simple and profound. It offered a measure of control over an uncertain afterlife. A wealthy merchant might fund a new chapel to ensure his entire family's spiritual security. A poor farmer might donate a single chicken, believing it would shave years off his mother's suffering. This created a massive, decentralized funding pool that bypassed kings and tax collectors entirely, funneling money directly from the pockets of the faithful into the cathedral's stone and mortar. It was a controversial practice, to be sure, one that would later spark enormous conflict, but in its time it was a brilliant, if unsettling, fusion of deep faith and financial necessity. It treated salvation as a commodity and faith as a currency, allowing every level of society to buy a share in the divine project rising in their midst. The very stones of the cathedral were, in a way, cemented with hopes for eternity. Behind the grand vision and the flowing river of coins stood a single, pivotal figure. He was known as the Magister Operis, the master of the works, and he was the cathedral's chief executive officer. Think of him standing on the building site, a ledger in one hand and architectural plans in the other. His was a role of impossible contradictions. He had to possess the soul of an artist to understand the master mason's vision for a soaring vault, yet the mind of a banker to calculate the cost of every single stone required to build it. He was the nexus where divine ambition met earthly reality. This man was responsible for everything. He approved the final designs, hired and fired hundreds of skilled workers, negotiated the price of timber with merchants, and managed a cash flow that could make or break the entire multi-generational project. His competence was the single greatest variable determining whether the cathedral would rise gloriously or stall in a cloud of debt and disarray. The project's survival rested on his ability to balance the books while inspiring the workforce, a daily high-wire act that required a rare blend of logistical genius, financial shrewdness, and personal charisma. We know this because of the meticulous records he was forced to keep, ledgers that have survived the centuries. These fragile pages offer us a stunningly clear window into the daily life of the construction site. One line item might record a payment for 12 cartloads of premium limestone. Another carefully notes the weekly wage for a master carver, a sum that reflected his highly specialized skill. There are entries for nails by the thousand, for sacks of sand, for the endless stream of food required to feed the army of laborers. These were not just accounts. They were the financial heartbeat of a miracle, each entry a testament to the master of the works' relentless focus on detail. The success of the entire endeavor, a project that defined a city for centuries, often hinged on the organizational brilliance of this one unsung individual, a man whose name history often forgets, but whose legacy is etched into every stone. Within that bustling cathedral workshop, the most vital knowledge was not found on parchment, but held in the hands and minds of the stonemasons. Their world centered on the lodge, a building adjacent to the main construction that served as workshop, classroom, and fortress of secrets. This was no simple shed. It was the protected heart of the entire operation, where the abstract lines of architectural plans were translated into solid, perfect stone. Inside, the air thick with limestone dust, a master mason might draw complex geometric patterns full size on a specially prepared floor, a temporary blueprint guiding the cutting of each crucial block. This knowledge of sacred geometry and structural physics was their most valuable asset, and they guarded it with a fierceness that would rival any modern tech company protecting its intellectual property. The guilds that controlled this craft were far more than labor unions. They were closed societies, part professional association and part secret brotherhood, and their power came from their total monopoly on the skills needed to turn a dream into a durable reality. A young boy entering this world as an apprentice faced a long and demanding path. He would begin with the most mundane tasks, perhaps mixing mortar or simply observing for years. His training was a slow, meticulous unlocking of secrets, passed directly from master to apprentice through demonstration and practice, never from a book. He learned to read the subtle grain of a block of stone, to know which way it could be cut without shattering. He mastered the use of mallet and chisel, not through brute force, but with a precise touch that could shave a millimeter from a surface or carve the delicate folds of a saint's robe. Only after 7 years or more of this rigorous training would he be judged ready to create his masterpiece, a piece of stonework proving his skill to become a journeyman. This system ensured quality, but it also tightly controlled the supply of experts, allowing the guilds to command exceptionally high wages and a level of social respect usually reserved for merchants and minor nobles. This control created a class of elite, itinerant craftsmen. A master mason was a citizen of a new Europe, defined not by kingdoms but by great building sites. He might perfect his craft on the spires of Chartres, then travel hundreds of miles to apply his knowledge to the vaults of Canterbury or the facade of Cologne. This movement created a hidden network, a pan-European web of expertise where innovations in flying buttress design or new decorative styles spread rapidly from one lodge to another, carried in the minds of these traveling masters. To protect their economic advantage in this competitive landscape, they developed a culture of profound secrecy. They used coded hand signals and private signs, much of which remains mysterious to historians today. The symbols they sometimes carved into finished stones, often dismissed as simple mason's marks, were likely a complex system of identification and quality control, a language of craft meant only for their own eyes. This secrecy was their power. It made them utterly indispensable, the only ones who could solve the puzzle of how to make stone float so weightlessly toward the heavens. The cathedral itself was their ultimate testament, a public monument built upon a foundation of fiercely protected private knowledge. The silent, patient source of the cathedral's grandeur lay deep underground in the quarries that scarred the countryside. Here, far from the soaring spires, teams of men endured grueling labor in all weather to extract the perfect blocks of limestone or sandstone. Their work was not about artistry, but about precision, using iron wedges and heavy hammers to split the bedrock along its natural seams, creating the raw material of faith. Each block was a significant investment, its cost encompassing not just the labor of extraction, but also the immense challenge of moving a mountain one piece at a time to the distant building site. This was the brutal beginning of the supply chain, a world of dust, noise, and immense physical effort that funded entire communities far from the cathedral's shadow. Once freed from the earth, the stone embarked on a journey as complex as its carving. In an age without engines, moving a single multi-ton block was a monumental feat of logistics. Carters and their teams of oxen formed the next essential link in this chain, their lives a constant negotiation with treacherous, muddy roads and unpredictable weather. A single cart groaning under the weight of 1 or 2 massive stones might cover only 10 or 12 miles in a day. For longer distances, the stone was loaded onto barges and floated along rivers, a slower but far more economical method. Every mile traveled added to the cost, with carter fees and the countless tolls paid to local lords for passage constituting a major part of the project's logistical budget. This vast, moving supply chain was a constant financial drain, a silent river of coins flowing out of the cathedral treasury and into the hands of quarry owners, carters, and toll collectors. The economic reality was stark. A single, beautifully carved statue high on the cathedral facade represented not just the wage of the sculptor, but the cumulative cost of its raw stone, its extraction, and its perilous journey across the land. How many cartloads of stone were lost to a broken axle or a swollen river, their cost sinking without a trace? The cathedral's walls were not merely built. They were purchased mile by difficult mile, their true cost measured in the sweat of the quarryman and the patience of the carter. High up on the cathedral's facade, a silent stone drama unfolds. Each figure frozen in limestone, from the serene saint to the tormented demon, was far more than mere decoration. In an age where few could read, these carvings formed a vibrant visual scripture, a Bible in stone that told stories of faith, morality, and consequence to every person who passed by. But this spiritual education was also a profound economic calculation. Every expressive face and dramatic scene was a form of divine advertising, designed to captivate the imagination and, crucially, to draw more pilgrims through the doors. The more breathtaking and talked about the sculptures, the greater the cathedral's renown, fueling the cycle of donations and offerings that kept the construction alive. This is why the sculptors and carvers, the artists who could breathe narrative life into rock, were among the most valued and highly paid specialists on the entire site. Consider the investment. A master carver might spend weeks or even months on a single, intricate piece, all while drawing a wage that could be double that of a standard stonecutter. The materials were premium stone and the labor was intensely skilled. For the building committee, this was a clear strategic choice. They were allocating vast resources not to structural necessity, but to embellishment, because they understood that beauty and story had a direct, measurable return. Ore was a marketable commodity. A pilgrim who stood mesmerized by the Last Judgment unfolding over the main portal was far more likely to make a generous offering, to return for future feast days, and to spread word of the marvels they had seen. This transformed the facade into a financial engine where artistic splendor translated directly into institutional wealth and power. And if you look closely, you can read a second, more personal story layered into the stone itself. The choice of which biblical scene or which saint to honor in a particular spot was often not made by the clergy alone. It was frequently dictated by the wealthy patron who funded that specific section. A merchant guild might pay for a window and insist their patron saint be featured prominently below it. A noble family financing a new chapel could demand their coat of arms be carved alongside the holy figures, a permanent fusion of their earthly lineage with divine imagery. This practice wove a complex economic tapestry right into the building's skin, where spiritual devotion and worldly status were forever intertwined. The cathedral's walls were not just a sermon, but a ledger, recording the hopes, wealth, and vanity of every individual who bought a piece of its eternity. While the sculptors carved stories in stone, another group of artists worked with light itself. Inside a workshop far from the main site, a master glassmaker presided over a fiery transformation. His materials were simple, common sand and wood ash, but his process was a closely guarded form of alchemy. He would mix these mundane substances in a clay pot and place them into a roaring furnace, a fire so intensely hot it could liquefy stone. Out of this inferno emerged a glowing, molten substance that, when cooled, became a sheet of clear glass. This was only the beginning. To create the brilliant colors that would fill the cathedral with divine light, the glassmaker needed rare and expensive pigments. A deep, celestial blue required cobalt, a mineral often imported from distant lands at great cost. A rich, blood-red glass was the most precious of all, for its color came from actual flakes of gold suspended within the glass itself. The value of these raw materials meant that a single misstep in the furnace could vaporize a small fortune, placing immense pressure on the craftsman and making every successful batch a minor miracle. The finished sheets of colored glass were then handed over to the glaziers, the elite artists who designed and assembled the windows. Their workshop was a mosaic of light, with hundreds of carefully sorted glass pieces covering their work tables. Using a cartoon, a full-size drawing on a whitewashed board, the glazier would select each piece of glass like a jeweler choosing a gem. He would then paint fine details onto the glass using a special paint made from iron filings and ground glass, before firing the piece in a kiln to fuse the paint permanently to the surface. Finally, he would assemble the entire image by slotting the glass pieces into a flexible framework of lead strips, soldering each joint with precision. This entire process, from the alchemy of the furnace to the leaded panel, demanded years of training and a flawless touch, making the glazier's wage one of the highest on the site. Who could afford such extravagant artistry? The answer is recorded in the light of the windows themselves. A thriving merchants' guild, having made its wealth from wool or wine, would often commission a window dedicated to their patron saint. You can still see their legacy today, a tiny ship or a barrel woven into the decorative border. A powerful noble family seeking to secure their legacy might fund an entire chapel window, ensuring their coat of arms would be bathed in holy light for centuries. Each magnificent window was therefore a complex financial and social transaction. It was a public declaration of piety, certainly, but it was also a bold statement of wealth and influence, a permanent advertisement frozen in light and color. The cathedral's walls may have been a stone ledger, but its windows were a glowing record of the economy that built them. The constant ring of hammer on anvil was the industrial heartbeat of the entire operation. While the masons carved and the glaziers painted, a small army of blacksmiths worked in open-sided sheds, their forges glowing day and night. these men were not creating decorative ironwork for the finished cathedral. They were forging the very means of creation itself. Every tool used on site, from the heaviest stone cutter's pick to the finest sculptor's chisel, began as a lump of iron at their anvils. Their work was brutally practical, a world of raw function over form. A master mason skill was useless if his chisel edge blunted after a few strikes. The carpenter's intricate joinery relied on saws with teeth sharp enough to slice through dense oak. The blacksmith's role was to ensure this never happened. He had to understand the specific properties of metal, how to heat, hammer, and quench a tool to give it a hard, durable edge that could withstand days of punishing labor. The efficiency of the entire project, the speed at which the walls could rise, depended directly on the quality of the tools emerging from these smoky workshops. This made the blacksmith's forge a critical, bustling hub, a place where workers would constantly come with broken handles, dulled blades, and requests for custom-made implements. The financial records reveal the hidden cost of this constant maintenance. Ledgers are filled with recurring entries for iron stock, and just as importantly, for charcoal. The forgers were insatiable, consuming mountains of this expensive fuel to maintain the intense heat needed to work the metal. The blacksmith was therefore a permanent, essential drain on the project's finances, his work representing a foundational investment in the basic ability to build. Without his skill, the grand vision of the architects would have remained forever trapped, locked within unyielding stone and uncut timber. High above them, the master carver shaped a saint's face with delicate precision, but down here in the pit, the work was pure force. This anonymous army of laborers formed the true muscle of the cathedral, a vast and shifting sea of humanity whose names are lost to history. They were the local peasants and landless workers who arrived each day at dawn, their tools simple and their tasks brutally straightforward. One man might spend his entire day knee-deep in a trench, digging the vast foundation with little more than a shovel and his own endurance. Another would stand for hours in a cloud of dust, endlessly mixing the tons of lime, sand, and water that created the mortar holding the entire structure together. The most common sight of all was the line of men hauling heavy baskets of stone or dragging sledges loaded with timber, their bodies bent under the weight of the dream taking shape above them. While a master mason earned a wage that reflected his rare skill, these laborers were paid by the day, a few coins that represented the bare minimum for survival. Yet when you multiplied that small daily wage by the hundreds, and then by the years and decades of construction, their collective cost became one of the single largest expenses in the entire project's ledger. This created a stark economic reality. The cathedral's soaring beauty was fundamentally dependent on an ocean of cheap, replaceable physical effort. For these workers, the construction site was not just a workplace. It was a temporary world. They lived in rough, makeshift settlements that sprang up around the perimeter of the site, a small city of huts and tents housing a transient population united by the need for work. Life here was harsh and precarious, dictated by the weather and the flow of money from the building fund. An injury could mean instant destitution, and a harsh winter could halt construction for months, leaving them with no income at all. Their existence presents a profound social contrast. The master craftsmen, with their secret knowledge and high status, could travel across Europe from one great project to another, their reputations preceding them. The laborer, however, was utterly rooted to this one place, his contribution seen as anonymous and interchangeable. Yet without his relentless, back-breaking labor, the perfectly cut stones would have no foundation to rest upon, and the mortar would never reach the walls. The cathedral, for all its divine aspiration, was built as much on this foundation of human hardship as it was on stone. While the master masons and laborers are the names we remember, the cathedral's true lifeblood flowed through a hidden network of support, much of it managed by women. The official ledgers focused on stone and skilled male labor often overlooked this essential ecosystem, yet without it, the entire worksite would have ground to a halt. Think of the sheer scale of the operation. Hundreds of men needed to be fed, their clothes cleaned, and their thirst quenched daily. This created a parallel economy of vital services, and it was here that women found their opportunity. One of the most critical roles was in brewing. Water was often unsafe to drink, so a weak, nourishing ale was the standard beverage for everyone, from the master carpenter to the lowliest laborer. Women frequently ran the small-scale breweries that supplied the site, their work ensuring the workforce remained hydrated and healthy. Similarly, the endless demand for bread was met by female bakers, who transformed grain into the staple that fueled the physical effort of construction. They provided laundry services, mending the dust-choked tunics and worn leather aprons of the workers. Their contributions, though financially small in individual transactions, were constant and cumulative, forming an invisible financial substrate that supported the entire endeavor. Some women operated at a much higher economic level, stepping directly into the world of commerce and contracts. When a master craftsman passed away, his workshop and its valuable tools did not simply vanish. It was common and often legally protected for his widow to take over the business. A woman who had spent years as her husband's partner, managing the accounts and understanding the clientele, could seamlessly assume control. We have records of widows of master masons, carpenters, and even stained glass glaziers successfully fulfilling existing contracts with the Cathedral Building Committee. They managed teams of journeymen, negotiated for materials, and delivered finished work, their authority accepted because their skill in business was undeniable. Beyond the construction trades, women were integral to the cathedral's spiritual adornment. The lavish embroidered textiles used in services, the copes and altar cloths shimmering with gold and silk thread, were often the work of female artisans in specialized workshops. Their artistry clothed the priests in splendor, making the rituals inside the building as magnificent as the structure itself. These women were not peripheral figures. They were entrepreneurs and artisans, their economic activity woven as tightly into the project's success as any stone in the wall. The cathedral, therefore, stands not just as a monument to the ambition of men, but as a testament to a complex society where the visible achievement was made possible by a largely unseen and often female workforce. The sheer scale of the workforce meant that feeding them was a project in itself, a logistical puzzle as complex as any architectural design. Every sunrise brought the same immense demand, requiring a constant, reliable supply chain for basic sustenance. The project's records reveal staggering figures, line after line detailing expenditures for thousands of loaves of bread, barrels of ale, and sides of salted meat. This was not a simple canteen. It was a sprawling, open-air economy dedicated to fueling human bodies, and its smooth operation was as critical to the cathedral's rise as the quality of the mortar. The choice of what to serve was a careful calculation of cost, nutrition, and preservation. Bread, baked from vast quantities of grain, was the absolute foundation of the diet, the calories that powered the hauling and digging. Ale, brewed on site or nearby, was the standard drink, a safer alternative to questionable water and another vital source of energy. Meat, often salted or smoked fish for affordability, and to comply with church fasting days, provided essential protein. Sourcing this volume of food transformed the local landscape, creating guaranteed markets for regional farmers, millers, and brewers. The building committee knew that a hungry workforce was a slow, discontented, and potentially vanishing one. Offering reliable meals became a powerful tool for attracting and retaining the massive labor pool required, a form of non-monetary compensation that kept the human engine of construction running smoothly day after day. This daily ritual of sustenance, therefore, was far more than a welfare program. It was a strategic investment, a massive, ongoing financial operation where the cost of feeding the many truly rivaled the cost of the stone they lifted. The sudden arrival of a king's entourage at the building site was an event of immense significance. The sound of hooves and the sight of royal banners did more than just stir the dust. They signaled the possibility of a financial windfall that could transform the project overnight. Royal and noble patronage was the ultimate shortcut, a massive, one-off injection of capital that could fund an entire chapel, a soaring spire, or a magnificent facade in a single stroke. For the cathedral's leaders, this was a moment of both opportunity and delicate negotiation. The motivations of these powerful patrons were a complex alloy of genuine, deep-seated faith and utterly shrewd political calculation. A king might donate a fortune to a cathedral not far from his capital, publicly demonstrating his piety to his subjects and to God. Yet this act was also a masterstroke of statecraft. By placing his name and his coat of arms on such a holy and prominent building, he was weaving his own dynasty's legacy into the spiritual fabric of the realm, solidifying his legitimacy in the eyes of the people. This relationship was a classic symbiosis. The cathedral gained a powerful, wealthy advocate who could protect it from local disputes and provide continued support. In return, the ruler purchased a permanent, unmissable advertisement for his power and virtue, a stone billboard proclaiming his devotion for centuries to come. But such generosity rarely came without strings attached. A noble family funding a new side chapel might insist it serve as their exclusive burial place, turning a sacred space into a dynastic tomb. A king financing the entire western facade could influence its sculptural program, ensuring the imagery reinforced his authority and his unique relationship with the divine. This delicate dance between sacred ambition and secular power was etched into the very stones, a permanent record of the deals struck between those who ruled the earth and those who sought to build a gateway to heaven. Yet even with royal patronage and a river of pilgrim coins, the flow of cash was never entirely reliable. The financial machinery behind the cathedral was far more complex than a simple collection box, relying on a sophisticated network of credit that stretched across the continent. When a shipment of premium English lead for the roof was delayed, or when a harsh winter halted pilgrim traffic and its associated income, the building committee faced an immediate crisis. They had hundreds of workers to pay and contracts with suppliers to honor. To bridge these gaps, they turned to the emerging world of medieval finance, to money lenders and bankers who could provide the crucial liquidity to keep the project from stalling. Cathedral chapters would take out substantial loans using their most valuable asset as collateral, their future expected revenue from lands, tithes, and offerings. This was a calculated gamble, betting on the continued generosity of the faithful and the enduring appeal of their sacred relic to repay the debt. The most sophisticated players in this high-stakes game were the Italian banking families. From their counting houses in cities like Florence and Siena, they developed financial instruments that allowed a cathedral in France to pay for timber from the Baltic or for tin for its organ pipes from England, without the perilous physical transfer of chests of silver coins. They used letters of credit, a kind of medieval traveler's check that could be honored by the bank's agent in a distant city. This system was the lifeblood of international trade, and it became equally vital for sourcing the specialized materials a great cathedral required. But this early form of project finance was fraught with risk. Interest on these loans could be steep, and if a project's income faltered for too long due to famine, plague, or simply a loss of public interest, the debt could spiral out of control. There are documented cases where ambitious building projects, crushed by their financial obligations, were forced to slow construction to a crawl or even halt completely, a form of medieval bankruptcy that left half-finished naves open to the sky for generations. This reveals a profound truth that the economic pressures bearing down on the master of works were as intense and real as those facing any modern corporate executive. The race to complete a cathedral was not just a spiritual marathon. It was a relentless financial tightrope walk where a single misstep could bring the entire heavenly ambition crashing down to earth. The cathedral's shadow stretched far beyond its walls, casting a new economic reality over the entire town. What was once a quiet settlement of farmers and local craftsmen suddenly found itself at the center of a bustling, noisy, and unpredictable economic engine. The sheer number of mouths to feed and bodies to house transformed the local economy almost overnight. Taverns and inns multiplied along the main roads, their signs creaking in the wind as they offered ale and a bed to weary travelers and workers. Market squares, once sleepy, now thrummed with activity as butchers, bakers, and candlemakers struggled to keep up with relentless demand. A new class of entrepreneurs emerged, from stable owners renting space for the carts of stone to laundresses mending the dust-choked clothes of the laborers. This was not just a building site. It was a city within a city, and its prosperity rippled through every lane and household. The local lord and the church, in turn, benefited from this boom through tolls, market taxes, and rents, creating a secondary stream of revenue that helped fund the project itself. For a time, it seemed like a perfect, self-sustaining cycle of wealth, but this golden age was built on a foundation of sand. The entire local economy was tethered to the single, monumental project at its heart, and that project's health was notoriously fragile. A single harsh winter could freeze the mortar and halt work for months, leaving hundreds without wages. A political dispute between a bishop and a local noble could freeze the building funds, causing the workforce to be dismissed overnight. The most devastating interruptions came from illness, when outbreaks of contagious sickness would sweep through the crowded, makeshift settlements around the site, bringing all activity to a terrified standstill. When the hammers fell silent, the consequences were immediate and severe. The innkeeper found his rooms empty, the baker's bread went unsold, the carter's oxen stood idle. The river of coins that had flowed so freely through the town's economy would slow to a trickle and then stop entirely. The town that had grown fat on the cathedral's promise now felt the sharp pangs of hunger. This cycle of feast and famine became the defining rhythm of life for generations, a constant, anxious dance between unprecedented prosperity and the very real threat of collapse. The town's identity became forever fused with the stone giant rising in its center, sharing in both its glorious ascent and its agonizing, unpredictable pauses. A cathedral's unfinished skeleton is a haunting sight. At Beauvais in France, the choir vaults rose to a dizzying 157 feet, an audacious attempt to build the highest ceiling in all of Christendom. Then, in the year 1284, the stonework gave way, crashing down in a cloud of dust and shattered ambition. The collapse was not merely an engineering failure. It was the direct result of economic strain, of corners cut and supports rushed when the treasury could no longer keep pace with the architectural dream. This was the ultimate cost of interruption. When the river of coins slowed to a trickle, the entire delicate ecosystem of the construction site faced immediate collapse. Skilled masons and carvers, their specialized talents now useless, had no choice but to pack their tools and leave. They would travel to the next town with a healthy building fund, taking their irreplaceable expertise with them, leaving behind a community stripped of its economic engine. The half-built structure itself became a financial parasite. It consumed scarce resources for basic maintenance, requiring temporary roofs and shoring to prevent further decay, all while generating no new pilgrims, no new donations, and no new glory. It was a monument to debt, a constant, looming reminder of failure that could saddle a diocese with financial obligations for generations. The great Cathedral of Cologne in Germany stood for 600 years as a stark example. Its immense crane perched atop the south tower like a frozen bird, a silent testament to ambitions that had outrun their means. These pauses in construction were not brief intermissions. They were generations-long hibernations from which some projects never awoke. They remind us that every stone giant we admire today is not just a triumph of faith, but also the winner of a perilous, centuries-long financial gamble where the stakes were the very skyline of a city. A quiet revolution was unfolding in the shadow of the scaffolding, one that would ultimately reshape the social order of Europe. For the master mason or the skilled carver, the weekly wage paid in cold, hard coin was more than just a payment, it was a key. It unlocked a door out of the rigid feudal world where a person's life and labor were tied to the land and the lord who owned it. Unlike the peasant serf who worked in exchange for protection and a portion of the harvest, these craftsmen were selling their expertise on an open market. This simple act of being paid cash for a skill created a new kind of person, the free wage earner, whose value was determined by talent, not by birthright. This economic independence fostered a new sense of identity. A mason from Normandy could choose to travel to a building site in England, negotiate his own terms, and use his earnings to provide for his family as he saw fit. He was no longer a subject bound to a single plot of earth. He was a citizen of an emerging Europe of great projects, his loyalty earned by the highest bidder and the most ambitious design. This migration of skilled, independent workers into towns created a critical mass of talent and capital. They bought houses, they patronized local businesses, and they formed powerful organizations to protect their interests, the guilds. These guilds grew from simple trade associations into formidable political and economic forces, capable of negotiating with town councils and even challenging the authority of local nobles. The collective power of these skilled individuals, all brought together by the cathedral's insatiable demand, began to shift the very center of gravity in society from the rural manor to the bustling, mercantile town. In this profound and largely unplanned way, the project that sought to glorify a heavenly kingdom was simultaneously helping to dismantle the old feudal order on earth. The cathedral did not just point toward the divine, it laid the foundation for the world we recognize today, a world built on the power of skilled labor, economic mobility, and the rise of the common citizen. Run your fingers over the cold surface of a cathedral wall and you might feel them, tiny, precise scratches carved into the stone, almost invisible to the casual eye. These are not random flaws or forgotten doodles. They are the economic fingerprints of the medieval world, the secret signatures of the stonemasons themselves. Known as banker marks, these simple glyphs were the cornerstone of a revolutionary accounting system. Each mason, upon finishing a block, would carve his own unique symbol into its face. A triangle, a crescent, a set of intersecting lines, this mark was his personal brand, his claim to the work. When the block was set into the wall, the mark was often left visible, a permanent record of a transaction completed. For the master of the works, navigating the chaos of the yard with his heavy ledger, these marks were an indispensable tool. He could walk the rising walls, identifying each marked stone and correlating it with the mason who had cut it. This was how he tracked productivity, measured output, and most importantly, authorized the weekly wages. Without this simple code, managing the output of dozens of masons, all working on identical-looking blocks of stone, would have been an administrative nightmare, ripe for error and dispute. The system created a bond of trust and accountability. A mason could not claim payment for a block he did not cut, and the master could not deny payment for work that was clearly signed and delivered. This prevented fraud and ensured that the river of coins flowing from the treasury reached the correct hands, keeping the workforce motivated and the project on track. These tiny marks, therefore, transform the cathedral from a monolithic symbol of faith into a living archive of individual effort. Every symbol represents a meal put on a table, a tool sharpened, a family provided for. The cathedral is not a single, anonymous monument. It is a collective masterpiece, a vast stone ledger where every entry was carved by a human hand, each mark a silent testament to the economic reality that built heaven on earth. But the sacred account book sometimes held a darker truth, a shadow economy of human temptation operating right beside the divine. For every coin given in pure faith, another could be diverted by greed or simple incompetence. The funds marked for the Opus Dei, the work of God, were not always spent as the donors intended. We have records of bishops and administrators using building funds to finance lavish lifestyles, to build comfortable palaces for themselves, or to fund political ambitions far removed from the cathedral walls. In one documented case, a bishop was found to have redirected money from the sale of indulgences, money given to shorten the suffering of souls, to pay for his own personal debts. This was not just a betrayal of trust, it was a spiritual scandal that could rock the entire diocese, sometimes requiring investigation by church authorities all the way up to the Pope himself. The methods of this corruption were often sophisticated. A trusted official might award a lucrative stone supply contract to a cousin, accepting inflated prices in exchange for a quiet kickback. He could approve payments for deliveries of materials that never arrived, or for the wages of ghost workers who did not exist. These were not victimless crimes. Every misappropriated coin was a stone that would never be laid, a beam that would never be raised, directly delaying the realization of a community's dream for years or even decades. Yet sometimes the greater damage came not from malice but from mere carelessness. A master of works with poor accounting skills could easily lose track of vast sums, paying twice for the same shipment of timber or failing to notice that his stockpile of lead was slowly being pilfered. This kind of mismanagement led to shoddy workmanship, as corners were cut to stay within a bloated and inefficient budget. Inferior stone might be purchased to save money, only to crack under pressure years later. Rushed construction could lead to structural weaknesses, creating the very real risk of collapse. The financial history of these monuments is therefore a deeply human one, a reminder that the drive to reach for heaven was always accompanied by the very earthly frailties of the people tasked with the building. The same ledgers that record the purchase of a single nail also bear silent witness to the timeless challenges of ambition, trust, and the corrupting power of vast sums of money. The sheer cost of a single cathedral could rival the entire treasury of a small kingdom. To truly grasp this scale, we need to place its economics beside another medieval giant, the royal castle. Both were monumental projects, but they were funded, built, and operated on entirely different principles, representing two competing visions of power. A castle was a military investment, paid for directly from the king's coffers and designed for swift completion. Its purpose was defense and control, a blunt instrument of feudal authority. The labor was often mustered through obligation, with local peasants required to provide days of unpaid work on their lord's fortifications as part of their feudal dues. This was a system built on coercion and centralized command. The cathedral, by stark contrast, was a long-term civic and spiritual enterprise. Its funding was a complex, decentralized patchwork drawn from thousands of individual sources, from the pilgrim's single coin to the merchant's generous bequest. And its workforce was not conscripted but recruited. These were free men, skilled artisans who commanded high wages for their irreplaceable expertise. This comparison reveals the fundamental economic divergence of the age. One model, the castle, was rooted in the old world of top-down, coercive power, where wealth was commanded and labor was owed. The other, the cathedral, pointed toward a new, emerging world of a faith-driven market, voluntary investment, and a free market for specialized skills. The castle walls were built to enforce a king's will, but the cathedral stones were laid by the collective will of a community, purchased one prayer and one wage at a time. High above the bustling worksite, a great wooden wheel turned slowly against the sky, a machine of awesome simplicity and power. This was the Treadwheel Crane, the medieval equivalent of a modern construction crane, and its presence on the site represented a massive and deliberate capital investment. Building one of these giants required the finest timber and the most skilled carpenters, men who understood complex joinery and could ensure the structure would bear immense loads without collapsing. Operating it was another matter entirely. Inside the large, hollow wheel, two men would walk steadily forward, their steps powering a rope and pulley system that could hoist a multi-ton block of stone hundreds of feet into the air. This was not just strenuous labor, it was perilous work that demanded immense concentration and trust. A single misstep or a fraying rope could mean catastrophe, sending stone and splintered wood crashing to the ground below. Because of this constant danger, the men who worked the treadwheel were among the highest-paid laborers on the entire site, their wages reflecting the life or death stakes of their daily task. For the cathedral's financial managers, the decision to commission and operate such machinery was a cold, hard calculation. The initial outlay was enormous, a significant drain on the building fund that could have paid for dozens of simpler workers. Yet the return on this investment was undeniable. A single treadwheel crane could do the work of 100 men with ropes and winches, lifting stones faster, higher, and with far greater precision. This technological leap drastically accelerated the entire construction process, allowing walls to rise and vaults to be sealed in a fraction of the time. It also introduced a new layer of safety, reducing the back-breaking and often deadly labor of hauling materials up rickety ramps. The choice to invest in such engineering marvels reveals a sophisticated understanding of project management. The cathedral builders were not just pious dreamers, they were pragmatic innovators who recognized that reaching for heaven required the most advanced technology on earth. Every groaning turn of the great wooden wheel was a testament to their faith not only in God, but in the power of human ingenuity to make the impossible real. A master mason from the rolling hills of England would pack his leather satchel with more than just chisels and a mallet. He carried the weight of an entire architectural tradition, a mind filled with geometric secrets and a pocketful of personal banker marks. His journey across the Channel to a burgeoning site in France or Germany was not a simple search for wages. It was a vital artery in a vast, invisible network, a circulatory system for the most valuable resource of the age, specialized knowledge. When he arrived at the new lodge, he did not come as a simple laborer. He was a walking library of innovation, his very presence capable of transforming a cathedral's design. Perhaps he had worked on the revolutionary flying buttresses at Chartres, understanding firsthand how to channel the crushing weight of a stone vault outwards and away, allowing for walls of breathtaking glass. Or maybe he brought with him a new method for rib vaulting, a complex pattern of stone ribs that could create a ceiling both stronger and more visually stunning than any seen before in that region. His expertise was his passport, granting him entry to the most ambitious projects on the continent and commanding a premium wage that reflected the rarity of his skills. This constant migration created a pan-European knowledge economy centuries before the term would be coined, where the competition for top talent was as fierce as any modern corporate headhunting. A cathedral chapter in Cologne, hearing of a brilliant master mason who had perfected a new tower design in England, would spare no expense to lure him across the treacherous roads of Europe. They were not just hiring a pair of hands, they were purchasing an architectural legacy, ensuring their city's cathedral would be the one to boast the latest, most awe-inspiring engineering marvel. This fierce competition for minds, not just materials, is why you can trace the spread of the Gothic style so clearly across the map. The pointed arch and the ribbed vault did not spread by chance. They traveled in the minds of these itinerant masters, carried from one lodge to the next. The great cathedrals we see as monolithic symbols of a single place are, in truth, stunning syntheses. Their foundations might be laid in local stone, but their soaring aspirations were built by a united nations of craftsmen, a silent collaboration that helped weave the diverse threads of medieval Europe into a shared tapestry of stone and light. The true weight of a cathedral is measured not just in stone, but in the vanished forests that once covered the land. For every ton of rock lifted skyward, the project consumed an almost equal measure of wood. The great roof beams required ancient oaks, trees that had grown for centuries, each one selected for its strength and length. These were felled by teams of woodsmen, their axes echoing for months in woodlands now forever changed. But the timber demand did not stop at the roof. The entire construction site was caged in a temporary skeleton of wooden scaffolding, a labyrinth of platforms and poles that climbed with the walls and was constantly repaired and replaced. Then there were the countless formworks for arches, the barrels for transporting supplies, the handles for every tool, and the fuel for the forges and the lime kilns. This relentless consumption of wood placed immense pressure on local forests, often leading to disputes over land rights and timber shortages that could halt construction for years. The cathedral was a hungry giant, and its appetite for timber alone could reshape the ecology of an entire region for generations. Deep beneath the ground, another resource was being extracted at great cost. The lead for the vast, waterproof roofs was mined from deep pits, a dangerous and toxic process. Miners faced constant peril from tunnel collapses and from the insidious lead dust that poisoned the air they breathed. The raw ore then had to be smelted in roaring furnaces, a process that released more harmful fumes into the atmosphere and required yet more wood to be converted into charcoal fuel. The environmental toll was steep, a hidden cost paid in the health of the workers and the scarred land around the mines. Yet without this durable, malleable metal, the intricate vaults and stained glass below would have been exposed to the ravages of rain and snow, making the lead roof an essential, if costly, shield for the divine ambition within. The very mortar that held the millions of stones together had its own dramatic origin story. It began in quarries where limestone was extracted, then transported to specially built kilns that burned day and night. Here, the limestone was heated to an incredible heat, a process that released plumes of smoke and transformed the rock into a powdery, reactive substance called quicklime. This material was then slaked with water, a violent chemical reaction that produced intense heat, before being mixed with sand to create the mortar that bonded the entire structure. The firing of these kilns was a relentless, fuel-intensive operation, another permanent drain on the surrounding forests. Every aspect of the cathedral's construction, from its deepest foundations to its highest peak, was a massive industrial operation. It consumed landscapes, redirected rivers of raw materials, and left a permanent mark on the medieval environment. This stone hymn to eternity was built on a foundation of profound earthly transformation, a reminder that reaching for heaven required a monumental expenditure of the world below. The final stone laid was never truly the last. For generations of townsfolk, the cathedral was not a finished monument but a living entity, a perpetual building site that hummed with activity long after the initial dream had been realized. This was not a sign of failure, but the ultimate success of a revolutionary long-term economic model. The cathedral had to become a stable, enduring institution, and this required a permanent financial and administrative structure to manage it. The cathedral chapter, the body of clergy responsible for its daily spiritual life, also evolved into a sophisticated, centuries-spanning corporation. They managed a complex portfolio of assets, from urban properties and rural farmlands whose rents provided a steady income, to carefully invested endowments left by wealthy patrons for specific purposes, like keeping a particular chapel in repair or funding prayers in perpetuity. This created a self-sustaining economic engine designed to outlast kings and empires. This ongoing revenue funded a constant cycle of preservation and renewal. A violent storm might shatter a dozen stained glass windows, requiring a team of glaziers to be summoned. A century of winter frost could erode delicate stonework on the facade, demanding the skills of master carvers to restore the sculpted saints. The great wooden roof beams, attacked by beetles and rot, needed to be replaced piece by piece, a task that kept carpenters and woodworkers employed for years. This meant the cathedral was never a static museum piece. It was a continuous source of skilled work, providing livelihoods for craftsmen and their families decade after decade. The economic stability of the entire town came to depend on this endless project. A mason might spend his entire career maintaining the very walls his grandfather had helped to raise, his wages drawn from rents collected on lands donated 200 years before. This long-term vision transformed the cathedral from a burst of ambition into a permanent anchor in the community, an institution that could weather plagues, wars, and social upheaval because its economic foundations were laid not for a generation, but for eternity. The true miracle was not just the initial construction, but this creation of a financial system so resilient it could keep a stone giant alive for 1,000 years. These silent stone giants are the final balance sheet of an economic miracle. They represent the culmination of a financial system as intricate as their own vaulted ceilings, a system built not on coercion, but on a shared, audacious dream. We have traced the river of coins from the hopeful hands of pilgrims to the strategic investments of kings, and seen how that wealth was managed with the precision of a modern corporation by the master of the works. We have met the human tapestry behind the stones, from the elite masons guarding their geometric secrets to the countless unnamed laborers whose sweat mixed with the very mortar. Their collective story whispers a profound truth across the centuries. Every great human achievement, every structure that seems to defy the possible, is never the work of a single vision. It is always a symphony, a fragile and powerful collaboration between unwavering vision, a sustainable economic engine, and the sheer, relentless force of human effort. The next time you stand before one of these monuments, look past the silent stone, see the bustling worksite, hear the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, and feel the presence of the generations who invested their coins, their skills, and their lives into a project they knew they would never see finished. If this journey into the secret economics of cathedral construction has changed how you see these wonders, we would love to hear which part of the story resonated most with you in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to join us as we continue uncovering the untold stories hidden within the architecture of our past.